Oh, what a pleasure it is to see everyone here this afternoon. My name's Eliza Canty-Jones. I work here at the Oregon Historical Society, and we're so pleased to host this panel discussion and also to host this exhibit, Building Solidarity for 30 Years, Portland Jobs with Justice. It has been really amazing for us at OHS to learn some of this history through the many ways that we've been working with these advisors and authors and creators and longtime knowledge holders. And I just want to, before we even get started, have a big round of applause for Lori Mercier and Nikki Mandel and all of the leadership team that's created this exhibit here. As some of you may know, OHS is a union here. Many of our employees are members of the ILWU, and so I think, so it's personal for us, as I'm sure much of this history is personal for folks as well. We often, at the beginning of our exhibits, ask folks to take a minute to think about the indigenous land where you are. There are many ways to think about land acknowledgements. We recognize here at OHS that the place where we are in Portland is the homelands of many Chinookan-speaking peoples, many tribes and bands, and that it continues to be the place where those people have ancestral ties. We also know that the city of Portland has the 9th largest urban Indian population in the country, and so we think about the many people who are indigenous peoples of other places who now make their homes in Portland. When we think about land acknowledgements, we want to ask everyone to take the time to learn the history of the peoples whose land we're on, to learn about the injustices and also the survivance that's inherent in those histories. And then we want to also ask people to recognize the sovereignty of Native nations. There's 9 sovereign Native nations here in Oregon that are recognized by the federal government. I imagine you are all politically active people. When you're going to make your advocacy to your elected officials and in other places, we urge you to take a minute to look to see what the Native nations might be advocating on, what stances they might be taking on particular issues as you engage in your own advocacy. So thanks everyone for taking a minute to think about our Indigenous history. We are recording today's program. Thank you to my coworker Jay and to Open Signal for providing the equipment today. So this program will be edited and the recording will be edited by Jay. We'll give credit where the work is done, and it'll be up on the OHS website at ohs.org in about 2 to 3 weeks. So you'll be able to listen back to the brilliant things that are being said and share it on with friends. So it's my pleasure to quickly introduce the moderator of today's program and then turn it over to them. Bob Bussel is Professor Emeritus of History and the former Director of the Labor Education and Research Center at the University of Oregon. He has spent over 4 decades in the union movement, working with the United Farm Workers, spending 10 years as an organizer with the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union, and 25 years as a university-based labor educator. He received both his undergraduate and graduate degrees in history from Cornell University, is the author of 2 books, and has published numerous articles on labor history and contemporary labor issues, and of course served as co-guest editor of a special issue of the Oregon Historical Quarterly on Oregon migrations, which you can purchase a copy of in our museum store. And just one last thing before I turn over the mic, we want to make sure folks are comfortable in the space. There's restrooms through these doors here, and also if you go this direction and down the steps, a water fountain and restrooms there as well. So thanks very much for being here.
Can you all hear me? Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Eliza, for those kind words. It's really a pleasure to come off the bench, as it were, and moderate this panel, this all-star panel, if I might add. So first, let me just say, happy anniversary, Portland JWJ, 30 years. And I think it's just really important to celebrate the achievements of one of the most visible and effective JWJ chapters in the country, because often in our movement, we don't take the time to celebrate, right? Because we're so busy in the struggle, well, what's the next thing we got to do? You know, but it's important to recognize and celebrate the extraordinary things that have happened here in Portland with Jobs with Justice. And also, I would just add before I introduce our panel, we were talking about it, Alice and a few of us at lunch today. It's such an interesting time, isn't it? I like to think I used to body surf in my younger days, and you know, waves, when you're out there, sometimes the waves look really big, and then they come in and they peter out. But this, what's going on now is really a wave. I mean, a real wave. There's something qualitatively really different going on here with workers and communities standing up. So I think as we celebrate Portland JWJ, because it's been part of a lot of waves, making waves as well as riding them, I think there's a lot we can learn from the experience of Portland JWJ that will help us reflect on this very unusual and important opportunity and moment that we have now before us. So with that, I'm going to briefly just introduce our panel, and what we're going to do is have each of them speak, and then we will leave time for questions and answers afterwards, because I suspect their observations and remarks about JWJ will provoke a lot of thought and really interesting discussion. So leading off, we have Margaret Butler, founder and first executive director of Portland Jobs with Justice. Batting second is Meredith Schafer, a former Powell's bookseller, now at the Strategic Campaigns Department of the International Association of Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers, who have the wonderful acronym of SMART. Next is Veronica Dujon, Director of Academic Policy and Public Planning at the Oregon Higher Education Coordinating Commission, or the HEC. And then Cecil Prescod, Minister of Faith Formation and Youth Ministries at the Ainsworth United Church of Christ. And Cecil is co-chair of the Faith and Labor Committee of Jobs with Justice. And then finally, Alice Dale, right here to my right, the former executive director of SEIU Local 503 and the former president of SEIU Local 49. So let's just give a hand for this panel. And with that, we're going to go to Margaret to set the table for this discussion, provide some context. Margaret.
Hi. So Jobs with Justice was always a collective effort, and there are many people in this room who helped in the building. So if you volunteered with Jobs with Justice, if you are on staff with Portland Jobs with Justice, stand up. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. It's a wonderful thing to be here at the 30-year anniversary, and I think I actually have to take my mask down because I can't see my notes without my glasses on. Anyway, so I also wanted to start by saying, wow, what a moment we're in to be looking here. You know, Jobs with Justice had some really big goals, including winning back the right to unionize, to collectively bargain in the US, building a movement that was strong enough to turn around the downward slide of wages and working conditions, building a multiracial union movement that was capable of doing those things. And look at what's happening in the world right now. Maybe it's happening. So I have 15 minutes to tell you the story of Portland Jobs with Justice. Ha, ha, ha. So I've just picked out a few moments that I felt that hope and that movement, or that were key in Portland Jobs with Justice, because there are thousands of pictures from 2003 on, and almost none before 2003. So anyway, let's see. Okay, we'll move on to slide 2. So, Jobs with Justice was born nationally in 1987, and there's my buddy Larry Cohen, whose brainchild Jobs with Justice was. No, they looked around the world in the 80s and said, wow, workers are getting our butts kicked, and what are we going to do about it? We need to go back to basic organizing. And so 1987, the founding convention, and Larry came to Portland in April of '87 and came to our CWA local, and I had been looking around to say, ooh, wow, where is there someone who really understands that workers are the people with the power? And he did. He said, the people at the National Union don't have any power. You're the ones. All you need to do is organize yourselves, and that union can do anything you want it to do. And so I was like really enthralled. And then he talked about this pledge card. I'll be there 5 times a year to support other people's struggles. If we sign enough people up on the pledge card, they come out enough, we can turn the whole thing around and start to win. What an exciting idea. I was all the way in. So what we did was, we did a rally before this, but we did a rally in 1988, and Ross Reeder, who has been very engaged in the Pacific Northwest Labor History Association, was the organizer. And the AFL spent, and the union spent about $30,000 on the one rally, signed 300 people on the pledge card, and then nothing happened. So some of us thought maybe it was time something should happen. So up on the top in the middle is Harold Brookins. He was my CWA brother. And he and I were talking about building jobs with justice, because CWA was being encouraged all over the country to build it. Bob Gross and Jamie Partridge were very engaged in the Rainbow Coalition, and they wanted to set up a labor phone tree, solidarity phone tree, through the rainbow. And then there's Laureen Shear and my husband, Rich Peppers, and the 3 of us were all in the AFL-CIO organizing committee, and we were frustrated with not getting funded and not getting our projects funded. So all of this came together to say, let's build jobs with justice. And we agreed to do it, and in 1991, it was launched with a meeting of about 15 unions. And one of the first things we did, a theme throughout the history of Jobs with Justice, was fighting for collective bargaining rights. And there was a National Day of Action. Again, no pictures are hardly left. This one was in the labor press, and I was one of 9 people who was arrested sitting in the NLRB office. And Laureen can tell you the story of how she had a meeting there and almost got arrested, even though she was really there for a meeting. So the first 5 years were basically an all-volunteer operation. Harold was off the job as a phone technician for a few hours a week, helping build the chapter. But we built a phone tree, and this is pictures actually from later of Jackie going through the whole process for mobilizing, built structures to mobilize. And then I had to throw in Jamie, dressed as Marie Antoinette at Tony Roma's. And that's another story that I don't have time to tell, but it was really a four-week series of actions at Tony Roma's connected to the minimum wage campaign. And of course, supporting union struggles. About 60 to 70% of our work always was supporting struggles. And these 2 pictures, OHSU in 1995 and US West strike in 1998. I know my CWA brothers and sisters remember that one. But the picture that I don't have is from the Fred Meyer strike in 1994, and that was a turning point for Portland Jobs with Justice, because we did a lot of activity to support that strike, including can and bottle return days. So we would all bring our cans and bottles and stand in line and talk to everybody in line and return our cans and bottles with the checkers and not buy anything. And all sorts of other tactics. And we were building for a big action right before the strike settled. And when it was over, we said to each other, wow, we really had an impact. We should take ourselves a little more seriously than we do. So we made a decision in mid-1995 to raise money and hire staff. And it was much easier than I thought it was going to be the unions were ready to kick in and help Jobs with Justice become a more stable organization. So we did that. Let's see if, and then we also always worked on common good campaigns at the same time. So that included, most notably in the early days, putting together a living wage lobby day in 1995, which Jamie Partridge organized so much of. And we had a couple hundred people, and we lobbied all the legislatures, and there were about 3 or 4 bills. None of them got a hearing in the legislature at all. Diane remembers this. And so what we did was we decided to take the raise in the minimum wage to the ballot. And we did that as an all-volunteer operation, and then the unions got involved, funded it, and so there were actually some paid petitioners who did that. But that picture of Jamie at Tony Roma's was part of that campaign. And one of the intersections between the common good campaigns around immigrant rights and the union movement is the farm worker work, and we did that from the very beginning as well. And this is a picture from supporting Pekун's NORPAC boycott, which went on for several years. So some people were very involved in stopping NAFTA work in '94, notably Leslie Cochin. But then the global justice work really began with work on Nike. And we did many, many, many demonstrations at Nike. And you can see our little puppet of Phil Knight there in the corner. And Nancy Hawk was hired as J with J staff in 1997. So she was our second staff person, shown there with Mary Winzig, who was one of the leaders of the Palace campaign. And then there was a moment that gave us so much hope, the Wto Ministerial Protest in November of 1999. And we are the only organization that we know of who turned people out for both the big labor march, thousands of people in the streets of Seattle, and the peaceful civil disobedience. So there were a bunch of people from Portland who participated in that, including Nancy Hawk, my coworker, who was Jane Doe number 520. There's a Willamette Week article about her, and she spent 5 days in a Seattle jail. So we came back from that so pumped up about what was possible, and about the art, the music, and the theater, which is also a theme of the work of Portland J with J. And I just had to throw this one in because I love this picture of Jose Padin and Dave Dornick as cows supporting the 3 Mile Canyon Dairy organizing at the downtown Safeway store in about 2004. So this was one of the biggest marches. And again, one of the things we were learning all through this time, and I skipped over all the part about how we grew and created more structure as we needed it, but one of the things we were learning about was that we really needed to connect all these issues. And so we did work on collective bargaining rights in all sorts of ways, and this was one of them. This was when it was being framed as the right to organize, then it became the Employee Free Choice Act. But we said we're going to join the global justice work, no to the WTO, and yes to the right to organize, because they are completely based in the same policies worldwide that are pushing the race to the bottom. And there's Christopher Lazo. Chris. I just want to say that I had to pick pictures very carefully, and people who should be in the slideshow are not. So anyway, Another key point was May Day 2006, when the Sensenbrenner bill had just passed, I think passed the House, and 40,000 people marched in Portland. Many immigrants took the day off, so it was a form of general strike, and it was a moment when we all thought, wow, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the turning we've been waiting for. Another key moment was 2008, when the economy crashed. We did they bailed out the banks. Where's our bailout rally? In a week, we got 200 people out in the street. We thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is our moment. And then we did this huge economic crisis town hall on January 31st. And both Joanne and Lori spoke at it. 900 people came to the Unitarian Church. And we were so excited about all of the organizing that could come out of it. And so each of these moments didn't lead to what we were hoping it would lead to, but they were all building blocks for what still needs to happen. And then the last slide I'm going to show you is from Occupy, which again, we put lots of energy and effort behind the Occupy movement. Wow, we are the 99%. Maybe the 99% will really rise up and turn everything around. And lots of people had the experience of collective action in that movement as well. But it didn't. And so here we are. Here we are. And we have another moment of uprising and hope. But things have shifted a lot. I've been gone from Jobs with Justice now for almost a decade. And I've been putting my energy into Extinction Rebellion, to building direct action for climate. And we don't have much time, you know? So I'm really hopeful, and workers are going to be critical to getting us through this moment. So all of you who are in the labor movement, put a little of your attention on climate, figure out how to connect. The lesson I would end with from Jobs with Justice is we really tried to connect the dots, put people together across issues, across work groups, so that we could build a real movement. And I'll end there.
You were right on time. Meredith.
Okay. I think you used up all the juice, Margaret. All right, thanks for giving me that background to what I'm going to say, which is a very small chunk of Jobs with Justice history. And it's sort of funny to come here and tell this story, because I imagine there's a bunch of people in this room who lived the history of ILWU Local 5 and the Pals Books campaign. Just for myself, how many folks were around in Portland? Okay. And how many went to Pals on May Day 2000? Oh, wow. Okay, this will be fun. So, my name is Meredith, and I moved to Portland in 1998. I graduated college, and I moved here, had never visited, had never been to Powell's. And I didn't really have a plan, and this professor at my college, who's a famous novelist, who I'm not going to name drop, said, oh, if you want a job at Powell's, let me know. And I know Michael Powell, and I'll get you an interview. It's actually very hard to get a job at Powell's, right? It's a pretty cool place. And so I was like, great, I don't I don't have any other plans. So the first time I went to Powell's was for an interview. And of course was immediately terrified that I would not get the job because I knew nothing about the bookstore. But that didn't matter. So somehow I got a job there. I don't know, exactly why they hired me, but I remember that the minimum wage in 1998 was $6.50 an hour, and I was hired at $6.75 to work in the phone room and pull books off the shelf for people who would call. This was like before the real internet, it was like the early internet days. So most people would call us, and then we would go get their books, and then we would ship them out, right? So I learned the whole store from doing that job for about 6 months. And this whole story is really just very dumb luck of being in the right place at the right time. And meeting the right people. But so I think I was hired in September, and the election was the following April. So the union organizing amongst workers there was already happening, secretly. And, I was sort of late to being read in on the plans. I think they were waiting for me to get out of probation. So then I had a target on my back because lots of people came and one-on-one'd me. And it was very kind of weird because it was like, okay, tell me what's really going on, right? And what was really going on was the company was growing, and they were getting geared up to compete with Amazon and they had put all their inventory online. And in the process of that, they were making a lot of changes. And so what became apparent as somebody totally new to the company, totally new to book selling, was that the people who were organizing the union deeply cared about the company and the business and the community that they had there. And the things that were changing were not just related to the economics, right, to the wages, even though you would be surprised, right? You would think that it was about wages. But many of the people who organized the union were the top wage earners, had been there many, many years, right? And so the issue of sort of what was going to happen to this independent bookstore institution was very much the driving force of that campaign. And so fast forward a little, we won our election, but the vote count was extremely close. So I think talking about this history in the context of what's happening right now with all of these union elections and seeing things like, 0 no votes at Starbucks over and over. I mean, it's like incredible. And so we won our vote by 6 votes, and there were 5 challenge ballots. And if you ask anyone who knows, they will tell you those were no votes. So going into collective bargaining with that very narrow majority is not good, right? It's an extremely hard thing to take on. And I didn't know that at the time, right? I was very naive about that. So, all credit due to the folks who understood that there was big divisions within the workforce and that the union building had to really scale up during the contract campaign, and that we could not just sort of like show up and write proposals and inevitably we would get a contract. I think people very much understood that you don't get a union until you win that contract, and that was going to be an incredible battle, right? So the other sort of, thing that was just, like I said, being in the right place at the right time was that we had a lot of help, right? And in the end, what was required to get that contract was not only pickets, but a strike. Are we out of 2 minutes? Okay. So I'll just tell a couple stories. One is how I met Margaret, which was that we did I believe a ULP picket at the shipping department, and the Teamsters honored our picket, which was just like mind-blowing to me. So I had no understanding of unions, and I was just like, okay, that's amazing, okay. And then, but then we were out there picketing, and UPS left because they honored the picket. And then we look and we see that there's like a van, and those managers are loading the packages into a van. And then the next thing I know, someone pulls up in a station wagon, and it's Margaret. I don't know who she is. And she's like, get your picket signs in the back and get in. And I'm like, where are we going? You don't remember this? This was amazing. I was like, who is this woman? She doesn't work at Powell's. So we get in the car with her, and we drive to like wherever, is it like Swan Island or like wherever the terminal is, right? Where they're gonna take these packages. And we like go out there, we like track them down, and we picket over, anyways. So, I mean, stuff like that was just incredibly important as a worker to feel like there were all these people that just magically came out of the woodwork and did these incredible things to help us win. And that was just a mind-blowing experience for me. I mean, it was hard enough internally to figure out the internal politics of how do you get everyone to go on strike and do all these things of your coworkers, but then to have people from all these other unions and clergy and community, make puppets and make picket signs and show up. It was just an unbelievable experience of solidarity that was not, a symbolic gesture, right? And I think, to me, that's the history of Jobs with Justice and of Local 5, is you can't win today if you don't have that kind of solidarity. And I think that really, I took that with me everywhere I went. So thank you to everyone in the room who helped make that happen.
Thank you. And I'm assuming because I couldn't see everyone, not everyone could see me, so I'm going to stand up. I'm Veronica Dujon, and I actually work with the State Higher Education Coordinating Commission, but before that, I was a faculty member at Portland State University. And I want to just give a little bit of background about the Workers' Rights Board. And I'll stand back and take my mask off. I think you can hear me a bit more clearly that way. So the Workers' Rights Board is actually a project of Jobs with Justice. And the way it is, the concept, the idea behind it is that there are a number of people in our community, faith leaders, academics, environmentalists, workers, ordinary citizens, who carry some moral authority in the places where they work or the places where they hang out. We also have state legislators, city representatives, county representatives on the Workers' Rights Board. And as we well know, although we have the right to our labor rights, we have labor rights in the United States, there are very few of them are actually practiced, nor are we allowed to feel or encouraged to feel that it is a legitimate way for us to be in our communities. What the Workers' Rights Board does is, with a membership of more than 50 or so people across all these sectors in the community, we listen and we hear from workers who have particular difficulties at their jobs. They could be violations or wanting to organize or particular grievances. They bring these to the board, and we have a process where we review them, we talk to the workers about what they would like to see happen, and almost invariably it's because there is some tension or reluctance on the part of employers to do the right thing. So what the Workers' Rights Board does, it essentially listens to what the workers are concerned about, what they're worried about, and tries to encourage the employers to be the good citizens we all want them to be. And there is a lot of moral and ethical reasons why we would want them to do that, and we're hoping that they would respond. Because we think of workers, and when we do, we think they're separate people, but they're not. They're parents, they're siblings, they're co-workers, they are people we meet in the community. We talk about workers, but they are us. And employers also have people who are workers in their families. And it is on that basis we attempt to draw them in to actually do the right thing. So the Workers' Rights Board listens very carefully to what these concerns are and provides an unusual venue, an unusual opportunity for the community to know what's going on. And therein is the power of the Workers' Rights Board. There are a number of ways the Workers' Rights Board attempts to get voices out. So there might be a letter writing campaign where these individuals who sit on the board put their names, sign onto a letter that's sent off to the employers saying, we understand there are concerns, here's what we've been hearing, here's what we would like you to do. We hope you will honor them and do the right thing, sign an agreement or move up the schedule because they're just dragging their feet. At other times, there might be a delegation, a small group from the Workers' Rights Board, carefully selected because of the standing they have in the community, to actually go meet with the employers at their site where they work, so they can actually see faces of people from the community and really push hard and get them to move. But sometimes that does not work, and so our ultimate action is to have a community forum where we invite workers to talk about what their experiences have been. We invite the community to come listen, and a wide swath of the community, not just some people. We often and almost invariably put out a media release, encourage the press, television, to come out and hear what is going on. So there is usually a process where the workers share with the community what is the problem, what it is they're experiencing. The Workers' Rights Board, the members on the panel who are listening, will ask particular questions, and at the end of the session, there's usually a report written about the information that's gathered and the action we would like to see taken. Now, it might sound like, oh, it's a lot of talk, it's putting it out in the community, but we have seen employers respond, because depending on the kind of employer you have or you're working with, they are sensitive to what's going on in the community. And I see Bob is getting ready with his 2 minutes. So I will just go ahead and actually share from about 2000, we've been keeping track of all these times when we had a community town hall or a community forum to give you a sense of what's happened over the past 22 years or so. So in 2000, as we just heard, the contract negotiations at Powell's concerning labor, health, safety, and environmental practices, we had that at Oregon Steel in September of 2000. The right to organize in June of 2001 about the Employee Free Choice Act. In 2002, Justice for Janitors, Condition of Janitors in Commercial Real Estate. November 2002, that was when that janitors effort took place. Also in 2002, Quality Patient Care and Collective Bargaining for nurses at Providence Milwaukee Hospital. We'd have another bout with them in 2021. Contract negotiations for teachers at Portland Public Schools in 2003. In 2005, contracting out and benefit cuts at Hillsborough Schools Art. That would be in September. In 2006, the workers' access to free and fair union elections at Providence. As you can see, a running theme here. 2007, staffing and collective bargaining for nurses in legacy health systems. 2010, Nike labor practices in Honduras. That would be in April. And in December, securing our future, rhetoric versus responsibility at Securitas. In 2011, the crisis facing the US Postal Service. Many of you would have been aware of that. 2012, the high cost of low-wage temporary work in Portland. That would be in October. And in February of 2012, contract negotiations at Vancouver Hilton Hotel. 2014, defending quality higher education, working conditions and learning conditions at Portland State University, close to my heart. 2016, safety for Instabab workers. 17, exploitation of immigrant carpenters in Portland. 2018, labor and human rights abuses at TriMet's Lyft paratransit service. And 2021, protect nurses, protect the community, hearings on province nurses. Thank you.
Yes, Cecil, you're up next.
Thank you very much. I think it's an amazing thing to reflect upon our history. So I think it's important to hear and listen and to build upon it. I'm going to speak briefly about faith labor and our connection with what we are doing. I think in any mobilizing effort, people look around to see who are the allies and who are the opponents. And oftentimes, religious institutions can be labeled as allies as well as opponents. What I think Faith Labor Committee is doing here with Job with Justice is lifting up the voices, religious and faith voices, who because of our deep belief, think we have no other choice but to stand with workers. And it is not in spite of our religious and moral teachings, but because of our religious and moral teachings that we stand in support as allies with workers. Faith Labor recently celebrated its 20th breakfast. 2/22/22. And what that means in part is for over 20 years, we've been organizing within the faith and religious community to stand with workers in various campaigns. That means in part many things, and why we lift up religious voices in workers' struggles. So it means, as I struggle to find my notes, one moment, please. So it means for the Faith Labor Committee of Portland Job with Justice, it's made up of labor and faith activists and leaders who come together to build sustained relationships between the labor community and individual and congregations in the faith community. During our annual Faith with Labor breakfast, we bring together workers, faith communities, organizations to hear the struggles and the campaigns that workers are involved with. That means, in part, what are the concerns of workers? Where may faith leaders and faith organizations participate in the struggles? And how might we, as community, work together? Let me highlight just a few campaigns that Faith and Labor Committee were involved with and why. We know about Burgerville and that recent campaign. So why were faith people involved in that campaign? Well, trying to think of nice words. One is that the owner of that corporation was someone who was not afraid to talk about how religious they were. And so Faith and Labor Committee came together and said, well, how might we influence those, the owner? And so through Faith Connections, we were able to think of ways in which people in their faith community could speak with them because they had a common understanding, a common ground. So that was one way in which we were able to reach that community. We are aware of the Nabisco campaign. And what we know, what we realize, that some of the leaders here in Portland region were ministers and workers. And they were able to talk and organize with their fellow workers, in part because of their heartfelt, deep religious commitment, but also because of who they were, workers that people trusted, and because of their, in part because of their faith commitments, were able to reach out and be a part of that struggle. A couple of other campaigns I'll highlight. Time and time again, workers in hospitals are trying to organize. And what we may not realize all the time is that some of these hospitals, foundations, were based on religious teachings. Well, you know, corporations have taken over, and so the religious underpinning of these hospitals are no longer. However, because of their relationship, faith leaders were able to speak to management and to remind them of their religious origins. So for example, in campaigns at Providence Hospital, Catholic religious leaders, priests and sisters were able to remind the hospital of their foundation and how they should do better. Similarly, in the Emmanuel Hospital, because of its Lutheran foundation, Protestant ministers were also reminded and urged to stand up and be there with the workers. So among the challenges and opportunities facing us is how do we build connection? How do we continue to work together? I think as we continue to work and strengthen our relationships and realize that religious organizations and congregations are made up of workers, we must continue to build and unite workers and remind all people that religious teachings can be on the side and are often on the side of workers. Hear, O person, what shall I do? Some of the scripture reminds us. Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with one another. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Cecil. So, bear with me on my voice, but I'm going to speak a little bit about SEIU's relationship with Job with Justice. It goes back to the early 1990s. What we realized in SEIU was that we needed to have a permanent coalition, not one that was episodic, campaign-oriented for a specific campaign, but something that was permanent permanent, had ongoing recruitment of members. We had tried in SEIU to create some permanent coalitions, and Rich Pepper sits here, he was a big help in that. There was a group called or an Alliance for Progressive Policy, which we tried to copy from Connecticut and Montana. And it was to focus on things like tax equity, increasing minimum wage, funding human services programs, but it fell apart. Then we tried to create the Heart of Oregon Coalition. We did create it, and it was to fund human service programs, which is children, families, poor people, disabled. It was sort of a lot of the precursor work that was helpful in the home care organizing campaign. There were others. One that's probably worth mentioning, which came later, was the AFL-CIO Union Cities program, which was really, I think, an effort at AFL-CIO nationally to create something like Jobs with Justice. But it ended up not having enough support from union leaders, and it was not successful. So we looked around, and Jobs with Justice had been there with us when public pensions were under attack, when we launched a minimum wage campaign with Jay Witch and some other groups, which was successful. A couple of years later, another minimum wage campaign to agree to put a cost of living adjustment in the law. So we realized, okay, we need a group like Jobs with Justice, one that is supporting workers in struggles around equity and justice. So when Mark and Jay started raising money, we said, yeah, that's what we should do. And I think probably 25 years later, it's happening. That was SEIU 503, later SEIU 49, with all Cecil and others have talked about, has been for nearly 20 years a major supporter. So some of the campaigns that Jobs with Justice made a huge difference in, one was a statewide strike in '95. Those of you who lived in Oregon know it was a massive strike, and we got public support on our side, which was pretty remarkable. And it's because we had the support of the faith community, that Jobs with Justice, which was a broad labor community support. We had 2 minimum wage campaigns. The Kaiser strike in '97. There was the home care ballot measure, which passed in 2002, and that was a huge effort. It was at that time organizing 10,000 home care workers. It's now over 20,000 workers. There was a service master, 2 strikes, and resulted in us being able to bargain health care benefits for children at a time when that was pretty unheard of for low-wage workers. With regards to workers' rights boards, those are extremely important. Veronica walked through a lot of those. It's pretty amazing. We had one in the Brookins campaign, which Bill Bradbury chaired. He had been the Secretary of State. So he was the chief elections officer for the state of Oregon. He was at that point had stepped down. But it was so important to try to pressured Providence to just let workers have a fair election. And it helped, but not enough, which is why we had come back a few years later and come back again. But there also was workers' rights board and service master, security workers, and that resulted in Oregon and nationally SEIU organizing more security workers and union in the country. Another slide is the Northwest Regional Education Lab. This is a very highly educated group of workers that had miserable working conditions and went on strike. Jobs with Justice was there, as were in these other campaigns. And it was just one example of many struggles where the credibility of the worker struggle took on a community dimension by having a group like Jobs with Justice. A third example is the Perry Center strike, and that was 2004, a very long, difficult strike. And again, this was a group of workers standing up for the quality of services they wanted to provide to children who were quite troubled, and an employer that was treating them miserably. So having a community presence and oversight and consciousness about the Perry Center operating differently made a big difference in getting that resolved. The final example, and one of my colleagues from SEIU 49 is here, Renato, who was part of many of the Justice for Janitors struggles. We had annual Justice for Janitors Day, and I think it's fair to say we could have had that fight at Local 49. It would never have been as successful as it was without the support of the labor community as a whole, and that was provided by Jobs with Justice. So I'll conclude with saying the most recent struggle is the Fight for 15, which has really taken off across the country. But what made it happen in Oregon was the initial efforts of SEIU, the work of Jobs with Justice, and many other unions that ended up being a part of that successful fight. The critical thing to us at SEIU, and I think a number of other unions, was to have an organization that was engaged with workers like many of you, all of you sitting here, who are willing to step up, whether your union officially was involved in that struggle or not. It was taking activists and making commitments that if we took on a fight, we'd be supported, and had the capacity to mobilize and to turn out. And so I want, that doesn't happen without people like all of you here, but I'll also say that kind of pointing and commitment is because of Margaret. So, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your comments and observations and great stories as well. So now is time for questions and answers, and let me just offer a few brief ground rules for this. One is if you could just identify yourself when you stand, and the second is I call it the Jeopardy rule. So the Jeopardy rule is make sure what you're saying is in the form of a question. Now, I know that's not always easy, but the idea is, you know, you can say a few words to frame your question, But do get to the question, because in the spirit of democracy, which JWJ embodies, we want to have as many people have a chance to ask their question as possible. So with those ground rules in mind, the floor is entirely open. Hands? Who wants to speak? Who wants to ask a question or offer a comment? And the other thing is you can direct your question or comment to people on the panel as individuals or the entire panel as a group. Yes. And Eliza will run the mic out so everyone can hear.
Hi, this is for the whole panel. My name's Cecil Prescod, Teamsters Local 223, Jobs with Justice Steering Committee. Just briefly, how has coalition building changed the movement from the inception of Jobs with Justice, sort of where it's at now and where it needs to go? I know, broad question. Thank you.
Who wants to start off on this?
Well, I guess I'll say that definitely more people have been engaging in coalition building. When we started Jobs with Justice, unions were not used to doing this as part of their regular campaign. Very few unions were using the organizing model, doing corporate campaigns, thinking strategically, and so that's gotten more normalized than it was when we started. We were like really the only kind of game in town then. And lots of people have tried to do different things. Alice mentioned the Union Cities program. You know, there were other iterations of unions building out their own sort of community work as well. And I don't know enough about sort of what's going on now. I think it has changed a lot. The technology has definitely changed. I don't think very many of the J with J chapters around the country are using the physical pledge card anymore, you know. But I think, and more people from other generations than mine are used to the sort of digital kind of mobilization, which the jury's still out, in my opinion, about that.
Okay, so I would also just add this. I think there is a clear understanding within unions about the strength of coalition building. And as Mark said, it's transitioned. However, I would also say that as a person who was head of a union for many years, it's so easy to get locked into your own program and be focused on that. What the power of J with J is that its focus was coalition building. It was crossing over union lines. So it will be very interesting with the organizing that's happening in Amazon, in Starbucks, with the pent-up potential for wage increases across the board, particularly with low-wage workers because of the labor shortages, whether or not the labor movement takes advantage of this moment in time to further change and to utilize the power of the labor movement, which crosses over many occupational lines. The challenges on labor movement, all of us to help make that happen.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, way in the back.
Okay, thank I didn't hear about the Cross-Border Labor Organizing Committee. And and it seems, oh, sorry, Jack Herbert. And, you know, the U.S. elites are running a worldwide economic empire exploiting lands and waters and peoples. And they rip off wealth from all over the planet and they bring it back here and they buy up politicians with it. And they win elections, and winning elections in the center of the empire is what enables the empire and getting the cooperation. And as Dan Denver, a PCAS organizer from the middle 2000s, said, the left has gotten stronger and more isolationist. So I don't see this vision outside the U.S. borders. And in the big picture, I don't see how we can succeed when we keep letting them rip off the rest of the world and bring the wealth back here to fight us. I'm wondering what you see about international organizing and solidarity.
Thanks, Jack. You know, certainly the Jobs with Justice, global justice work was very committed to the cross-border thinking and work, and you know, you've been to many meetings where we supported those struggles, and I do think that you have to think globally. So yeah, I had to pick a few slides, and only 2 of them were connected to the broader global vision. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to just add this. For those of you who don't know, when I left SEIU, I went to work for Global Union, which is one of 6 union federations globally. And the fact is, SEIU, CWA, USCW are 3 U.S. unions that put enormous amounts of resources into international organizing campaigns. What is surprising to me is how little we talk about it, and maybe how little we all know about it. And it wasn't until I went there that I realized how important it was. But for example, the sector I headed up was property services. The biggest companies in the world in security, G4 at Securitas, we had global organizing agreements that guarantee wherever they operated in the world, workers would have a right to organize without opposition. There would be the easiest union recognition process, and there would be a dispute resolution where that didn't happen. And each of those companies would work toward a living wage in our country. Now, I suspect a handful of people in this room who I know that, okay? So we should talk more about it. That's very real work grounded in organizing workers. Now, having said that, it is a drop in the bucket. So to your concern, it's like we don't put enough resources into it. The U.S.'s policies, corporate-wide, internationally, are despicable. And we have to do much, much more in the realm of international organizing. But it does happen. And it happens with a lot of major unions in this country.
Thank you, Alice. Yes, right up here in the front. I can bring, why don't I just bring this mic? It'll be cool.
This person was first, sorry.
Oh, okay, sorry, I missed, yeah, go ahead. Sorry, missed you in the back, Tina. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Tina Turner-Morford with the Coalition of Black Trades Unionists. The question that I have is that given that there is a lot more interest in workers joining unions, and so we all know that phase 1 is getting those workers to sign a card saying that they're interested. And then once they win that, then you hop into phase 2, which is that first year, that first bargaining contract. And we know that there's difficulty in that because the employer wants to drag it along so that they expire the time frames. So my question is, what's being done about that as far as organized labor? Are we helping them complete that process aside from doing picketing and informational stuff?
Thank you for that question. Thank you for that question. This would be one of the situations where the workers have already indicated interest in bargaining, but the employers are reluctant. This would be a situation where the Workers' Rights Board would be very interested in knowing what's going on with the intent of both approaching the employers, maybe writing a letter, sending a delegation, or having a town hall where the workers can talk about what their experience is. It's really exposing to a much broader number of people in the community what's going on. And sometimes it's that pressure that forces them, because if they have bad press or the television picks it up or more people know, then they feel a greater responsibility to do the right thing.
Thank you, Tina, for that question. And I do want to bring it back a little to the history of Powell's, which the Workers' Rights Board hearing at Powell's, I think, and a lot of people think, was a critical piece of what brought that settlement, because Michael Powell actually cared what his peers thought of him. And so the day of the hearing, we had asked to meet with him ahead of the hearing. We had invited him to come to the hearing and tell his side of the story. He said, no, collective bargaining isn't your business, community, it's not. But the day of the hearing, he called Diane Rosenbaum and he called Diane Lynn and said, I want to meet with people from the Workers' Rights Board. There was a meeting a few days later, and then the next round of bargaining, and he said at that meeting, I know any contract that's settled will have to include union security, which was his big public talking point. I'm not going to tell people they have to join the union. And so he made a compromise on it, and they negotiated that contract the next round of bargaining because he cared what those people. So it's always figuring out how do you reach through, and a lot of the employers don't care, and how do you build enough power? How many thousands of people in the streets does it take to actually get the point across? And I'm hoping, I know lots of people in New York have been supporting those Amazon workers from all sorts of organizations, including Jobs with Justice there. And I expect that if the delay starts, which I'm sure it will, that there will be lots of people rising up to say, these workers get a contract.
Thank you, Margaret. I just want to add to that, which is, I think you're right. I think that was a really key part of it. I mean, certainly also we did go on strike and close the store down, which had not ever happened, which I know you know. And you were inside on that day, so I know you know, because you sat down and refused to leave. Right. There were a lot of cops, but they didn't go inside. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think I can't remember the statistic, it's old research, but I'm sure it's still true, is I think 35% or something of workers who win elections get a first contract. Right. I mean, it's shocking, right, to think that, and how hard it is to win an election, and the sort of, all of the anti-union sort of pressure cooker that starts with that process. But I think that, I think that's really what we should all be talking about, is how do we support workers who are, voting for a union? Because the headlines, right, the media is terrible on the labor, even though now it's like a national news story every time like a captive audience meeting happens. It's kind of great. But but the media really is like even worse than, most people in terms of how they talk about labor issues or talk about votes. And so we see these headlines, right, that workers want a union, but but they haven't, right? Like they have in the sense of they collectively said we want a union and they voted, but under the law, right? That's not how it works, unfortunately, and the law sucks. But we shouldn't we shouldn't wait around for the law to change, certainly. And I think that the unions have a lot of work to do around how they think about contract campaigns and first contracts and sort of what that work is and what it looks like. And we were sort of fortunate in that we were starting a totally new local from scratch, and we were sort of, we were already very connected with the labor community, and so we sort of had, no mold to break, right? And I think, unfortunately, in a lot of unions, it's a struggle to get resources towards contract campaigns, or especially first contract campaigns. And so, there's a lot of dysfunction around that, and I think that, coalitions like Jobs with Justice can really can make or break those sorts of struggles. So.
Zach Patton. I'm a longshoreman in Tacoma, ILW Local 23. Shout out to my Local 5 friends here and down the street at Pals. I had a question. I know that JWJ in a lot of cities has kind of fallen apart or dwindled. I'm curious to know, in your minds, what has accounted for the Portland chapter's success and ongoing success, and for newer and younger activists who want to try to start new JWJ chapters in their own cities and communities. What is one piece of advice that you would give to those folks? Thank you.
Let's see. Well, I have to say, I think some of my friends here in the audience have told me that we figured out how to lean into conflict rather than avoid it. I'm looking at my Barbaras who have told me that, both of them. And I think figuring out how to not let things get so polarized that the organization gets destroyed was something we got really good at. And we had enough stuff going on that any one situation wasn't going to tear the whole fabric apart, because there was conflict and there were situations, but we had sort of a policy that we tried to really enforce, that it was fine to disagree, it was fine to, have a fight about strategy, but you weren't allowed to attack each other. So that's what I would say is one thing about Portland Jobs with Justice. In terms of advice, grab hold of it, care for each other, and go as fast as we can, because we don't have a lot of time.
I don't know that I have any specific advice, but I think size matters and levels of connectivity matter. In a city like Portland, where there are lots of opportunities to relate to other people, there's a workers' rights board, there is an attempt with the city council for people to remain engaged. As much as citizens remain engaged in one area, it's possible to connect to other areas. So that connectivity, whether it's in your neighborhood, your farmer's market, whatever you have, just having the people connection, I think matters a lot.
Yes, let's see. I'll take it somewhere. We have Renato, there's a person in the back, Diane, and a person up here, so I got 4 lined up, teed up here, just so you know.
Thank you, Bob.
Hello, my name is Renato Quintero. I'm from ASCIU Local 49. As a union activist, I haven't been have a great support for all people from my local, Alice, Dale, and others. But my question is, what kind of efforts have you done in Just for Justice to integrate those who English is not their first language and they belong to another group that are minorities?
Well, I've been gone for 10 years, so my answer is kind of old. But we did provide interpretation at steering committee meetings. We offered it anyway. Usually it wasn't used, but occasionally it was used. So in terms of language, I think there's a lot more that could have been done there to really be welcoming. And in terms of sort of inclusivity more generally, we certainly prioritize struggles of communities of color. We're always the priority. We asked on our request for support form how this situation helped build for racial justice as well. And we were constantly working to try and take those of us who are white in leadership, take those blinders off and make sure we were connecting as tightly and as closely as we could across all the lines.
Hi, hello? 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 Yeah, it's on. I'll just yell. Oh, Margaret introduced me before. I'm Christopher Lazo. Hi. Margaret trained me to do a lot of this cool stuff. My question is, is it on? Okay. So the racial justice uprising of 2020, some unions showed up, but a lot didn't. And I'm just wondering, I mean, you were just talking about this, Margaret, some of the leaning into the conflict, and I think one of the things that stands out for me is the work we did around police accountability and whenever that was. But I'm just wondering what you think of the legacy of Jobs of Justice, pushing on those issues, police accountability, immigration, racial justice. And I think it really paved the way for a lot of other good work. I wish it went a lot further, but I'm just wondering what y'all think about the labor movement today, JWJ's influence on pushing on some of those issues, specifically racial justice.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Recently, the Faith and Labor Committee is doing some internal examination and stuff, and talk about what campaigns to focus on, and people raise up different issues, and one person said, well, I think we should focus on labor issue, which was a very narrow understanding of justice, and I haven't had a conversation with this person, but it reveals to me a part of how wide we think we should focus on, and what are the issues. So issues that came up broadly to the public in 2020 around racial justice and police brutality, and currently issues around trans rights, which may not seem to fit under the old model of what labor should be involved with, but I think only when we are able to hear the voices of the community and lean into those issues and really be willing to struggle with them, will we see any advancement in terms of solidarity and leaning into the voices of communities who have not had the mic. And that's difficult. And it takes time, and I think it takes courage to say, well, this doesn't seem like the issues we typically struggle with, but those are the issues that's rising from the community.
Chris, I can't give you a current day thing, but I do just want to say that Chris led a lot of work on police accountability about killing of black people, that we participated in the Albino Ministerial Alliance's committee, and we went through a whole controversial issues policy to make sure that the unions who had a problem with that at least would step aside and not block our activity. So we were in good conversation about it. But yeah, I absolutely think that unions should have been in the streets as much as possible supporting Black Lives Matter in 2020, and I'm sure lots of people did come out. I mean, this put a little crimp in some people's getting out there.
I think we have time for two more. So Diane, you had your hand up for a while. There was somebody up in the front here.
Thank you, and I think you can hear me. My name's Diane Rosenbaum, and I was a member of the Workers' Rights Board for a long time and also a state senator, and I hope you'll indulge me because I have a comment and then a question. So I didn't get to say this when Margaret Butler retired in 2013 from JWJ because I got hit by a drunk driver downtown headed to her retirement party, but just wanted to thank you for a lifetime of fighting for justice for workers. And I will just say, Margaret said she didn't have time to tell you the Tony Roma's story, but very quickly, Tony Roma's, which used to exist as a restaurant in Portland right across from the convention center, was such an opponent of raising the minimum wage that we repeatedly were in there. And Margaret, I think, got a permanent restraining order against her to keep her out of Tony Roma's because of these demonstrations. And we went on to, after that 96 minimum wage campaign, which we won on the ballot overwhelmingly, the legislature, then in control of Republicans, tried immediately to enact a tip credit, a sub-minimum wage for young people, and take away the minimum wage for farm workers. And Margaret and a huge coalition repeatedly brought those very workers into the state capitol, which you can see up there, to stop that from happening, which we finally won even under Republican control. And that was amazing. I just want to ask, though, I think it often feels about the intersection of politics and organizing to elected officials like me. It feels like progressives and sometimes labor people never feel that we've done enough. And I get why that is true, but I just wanted to ask you, Margaret, or the panel, what would you like to hear elected officials saying in this very scary election year that we're in right now, where a lot of people think things will go badly, not so much in Oregon, but definitely at a national level? What is it that people running for office need to say to speak to our base as well as to the voters who should be with us but aren't always there?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's still collective bargaining rights, changing the system. being out on the picket line supporting workers when they are in struggle is what I want to see people doing. And then climate, you know, what are we going to do in the next 3 years to turn around this crisis that we're in? Those two things.
Yeah, so I'll add this piece. I think that if we go back to the Trump election, which looks frighteningly possible, something like that could happen again, is that there were very disaffected workers across this country, whether the Rust Belt or other places, who didn't see Democrats being strong enough on their behalf. Now, I think there is certainly the Biden administration is trying very hard to show that's not the case, and many good, strong Democrats. But I think that Democrats have to lead very strong on issues that resonate with workers, whether unionized or not. Certainly, core collective bargaining issues should be strengthened while we have a chance to do it. But I think that that Republicans lie in the field. They take credit for stuff they voted against. We know all that. And I think Democrats have to be bold. They have to call them out, and they have to be very vocal about the stuff that they stand for, and Republicans don't.
Time for one more question. There's a person right up here in the front, so you're going to have the last question.
My name is Daniel Shea. I'm with, I've been with the GCIU. Local was a printing press business 43. That was some time ago. I was an elected official there, was in a major struggle, and ended up losing my job. I was threatened. They tried to bribe me. They tried to do a lot of things, and that was with R.R. Donlan, one of the largest non-union printers in the world. So labor organizing across the borders is very important. It was important to me back in the 1980s when Laurie King and Dave King were doing cross-border organizing. Jamie Partridge was a part of that. I've been a part of a number of union struggles across throughout Portland with various people. I went back to school in my 40s after I lost my job. I was injured on the job. And one of the things that happened there was what you learn is you learn in the struggle. When you know, leaders come out of the struggle. I didn't know shit about unions when I got involved. I learned because of the struggles that we were going through. And that's how people become leaders in this movement. So how do we reach other people? They get involved in the struggle. So when Jobs for Justice is out there on the picket lines, people see you. They join those things because they are going through the same kinds of issues that every worker is going through. They want better conditions. They want to be able to put a roof over their heads for their families and feed their families. One thing when I was back at the university, which was actually a good thing for me, I also rediscovered, I'm a Vietnam veteran. So I'm a very active, I'm with Veterans for Peace, Chapter 72. I've been on the national board. The issues of labor and war and cross-border organizing are very important to me. And I think that one of the things I learned is education. Part of the struggle is educating people. You ask, how do you reach more people? They need to be educated. Why don't we have labor studies at Portland State University? Why aren't we working towards that? I was trying to do it back there in the 1980s and 90s, and I couldn't get very far. But we need unions in solidarity to demand it. And then maybe we can get that and teach more people, because we've got to reach the young people for the next generation. Thank you.
We are out of time. And just beginning to scratch the surface. So first, let's just thank our stellar panel here. Thanks again to the Oregon Historical Society for hosting this event and the exhibit. And last but not least, thanks to all of you. there somebody from PNLHA that wants to take the mic now? Go for it.
This wasn't planned at all, but thank you guys. That was just like absolutely spectacular. And of course, it's up to all of us to not only keep it going, but to get the next generation to keep it going. The thing that I just wanted to jump up and say is we do have the co-sponsored Jobs with Justice PNLHA exhibit over here through May 15th. So please take some time today to tour through it. And if you don't get to see it today or you don't see as much as you want to, come back in the next couple of weeks. And I don't know if that's all I wanted to make sure I said. Thank you all who were part of the conference for coming to the conference. And if you're going to go to the general meeting at 4 o'clock, we have some time to do some other stuff before that across the street. Anybody else from PNLHA want to say anything? Eliza, you want to? Solidarity.